listening to Unfiltered with Mohammed, a podcast about personal growth and authentic leadership. If you're looking for tips on how to manage others, get ahead, and make your way up the corporate ladder, this is not the show for you. This podcast is about being of service to others, leading from the heart, and evolving into a better version of yourself. Each episode brings you motivated stories about unfiltered leadership and authentic leaders, those who involve others, use their influence to amplify diverse perspectives, and inspire teams to achieve collective results. If this sounds like you, keep listening. Hello and welcome to the Unfiltered podcast, and welcome to my guest, Alain Hunkins. Thank you very much for joining me today. How are you, Alain?
Mohammed, it's my pleasure. I'm great. I'm really excited for our conversation today.
I'm so happy to have you here. I know we tried to get you on the show earlier this year, but as fortune would have it, we got you here today. And I know that just before we started this podcast, you were telling me how excited you were because you just shoveled a foot of snow. You were dumped on, and I think you said it was in Maryland, near Maryland? No.
I'm in Massachusetts. There you go. It's those MA states. There's 50 of them down here, below the border of you. So yeah. I was just shoveling about a foot of snow for about an hour. Well, so I've got my pre-interview shoveling endorphins on. It's great.
Well, that's awesome because we're going to pull on those endorphins. We're going to get them into the conversation and get people to understand who you are, what you do, and why you inspire people every day. And I'm going to ask you, give me some background on who Alain is.
Sure. I mean, for me, it really boils down to what my mission's about. I was lucky enough to go through an experience where I get really clear when I was 26 years old on who am I? Why am I on this planet? Which I think is a really good question, worth spending time answering. And for me, it's like what I want is to create a really vibrant and alive world by kindling the fire of brilliance in people. That's really what motivates me, what gets me up out of bed, what gets me to write and speak, talk, train, learn, because I just feel that, as human beings, just our potential is just outstanding. And how can we draw on that and make our own lives and the lives of our communities and our families and the world a better place? So that's what really drives me, and everything else is commentary.
Amazing. I could have introduced you to the guest, but I noticed in talking to you just before we started, there was so much passion. I would not have been able to give you the due justice that you have just given yourself in explaining to my guests and my listeners who you are. And this is important because what you just really described was huge. To say that we can actually take on such a feat and to be able to manage to take on the world, to make the world a better place, but you are doing it. You're doing it in the work that you do every day and helping people and in your writing and your speaking. And I want to go to a place first and just say, why do you think it matters to lead by example? Because this podcast, Alain, is really about leadership isn't top down. And it's not about others telling us what to do. It's about being the sort of person that can inspire ourselves so we can inspire others. And the way you just described yourself, why you get out of bed every day, is such a person. But why do you think it's so important to start leading ourselves, Alain?
Well, it's where it starts, Mohammed, yeah, I have this lofty vision to create this vibrant, alive world. And the fact is there's 7 billion or so people on this planet. The fact is I'm not going to meet all of them. But you know what? Every person that I meet every single day is part of my world. And I have the opportunity to influence them. Like this opportunity, how do I want to show up? So going back to your question of, why is it important to lead by example? One of my favorite quotes comes from Albert Schweitzer. You may know this quote. He says, example is not the main thing in influencing others. It's the only thing. And if you just think about your own experience, whether it's parents, teachers, friends, I mean, what is it that we're left with? It's their state of being. It's who they are. And so for me, I just believe I need to walk the walk. So for example, and I teach this stuff around, for example, being credible. The importance of leaders need to establish credibility, because your credibility is basically, do people believe that you're worth following? Because in this day and age, leadership isn't because I'm your boss. That's why, because that's compliance. You only get so much. It's about you are committed. You are inspired to bring your best self. And so as I think about modeling that, it's just so important. So you model that so people want to give of their time, of their effort, of their skill. So for me, example is it's what I need to do. So when I teach credibility, the first thing I say, the easiest thing you can do in the world, the most easy thing to measure is show up on time, right? Because if you say you're going to be somewhere, you're either there or you're not. And so everything else rolls from there. That's step number one. And then beyond that, get really clear on if I say I'm going to do something, then be clear, remember it, and then follow through and do it, right? So do what you say you're going to do. Those are the basics, and everything else builds on top of these basics. But because everything, every action builds a bank account of trust and reputation and credibility, either pro or con. And so, yeah, that's a burden. And it's also a wonderful, wonderful opportunity to influence others.
And it's a gift. And when you
Yeah.
can actually establish that trust, and you said the T word, because as you're thinking, one of the things I try to do in these podcasts is to be present and listen. But when you started talking about credibility and the need to be consistent and to show up consistently, I kept thinking, because you want to build trust, because you want to build trust. And that's what we're doing. If we lead by example as a parent, and we lead by example and we say, hey, watch me do what I'm asking you to do, and this is why it can help. Because
Yeah.
you're going to see how it paid off for me. If I tell somebody, I don't smoke, all due respect to smokers. If I tell my kid, hey, you shouldn't really smoke, it's not good for you, right? Or I turn around and I use a vape, or, in our culture, I use a nargile,
Yeah.
right? Then I'm not setting a good example. I'm being a hypocrite. And so no one is going to believe me. I'm not modeling by example. To your point, it's the only way to lead, not one of the ways. In a workplace, we have so many leaders who think they're above the hey, just do as I tell you and don't worry about me. We don't have to have that connection, because you know what you've got to do in order to get things done, and I'll check in on you. And then we go away, but then just come in every once in a while and say, hey, how are things going? But you don't see me. I'm not a footprint by which you can walk. You don't see me role modeling, you see me role playing, and that's not authentic. And then when you walk away, you're going to have that behavior with the people that you're leading. So when people are working with you, seeing you, walk the walk and talk the talk, they're going to see, you know what, that person inspires me. And then you carry your influence and you pass it on. Completely resonates. Now, where does this break down? Because I'm sure you talk to so many people in workplaces. You've been on stages talking about it. You've written about this. Where do you see it breaking down?
Oh, it's real simple. I mean, everything we just said about modeling by example and doing it, it takes focused effort. Now, it's a different type of effort than most leaders are used to. See, most leaders got into those positional, titled leadership roles because they were smart, high performers who got stuff done. They were great contributors, right? But Mohammed, there's this huge gap between being a high performer and facilitating high performance in others. That's a completely different skill set. And where it breaks down is because to really realize, okay, I'm now a role model. I need to model all these things. That takes a certain level of conscientiousness and intentionality. And that wasn't the skill set you necessarily had before. And so that takes work. And frankly, a lot of leaders are lazy when it comes to realizing that. And lazy leadership translates into lousy leadership, right? It's just that these are the things, right? Lazy becomes lousy because
Love it.
you talked earlier about the sense that people, if you smoke and then I do this, do what I say I'm going to do. I'll just give you an example. So my daughter, who's now 13, I remember she was in the second grade and her class took a field trip to the local survival center, the food which they have donations of food all over. And in the survival center, there was this whole bag of candy that had been donated and stuff. And it was sitting there. And as the kids walked by, they noticed that their teacher took a candy out of the bowl and took it. And the kids, of course, were told not to take anything. But oh my gosh, that the kids talked about nothing for weeks after that, right? Because like, can you believe, that Mrs. Newman took that? I mean, they were going because the thing is, this is the thing. As a leader, realize you are being watched all the time. And so what is that's not good or bad. That's just reality. So what are you doing? What are you doing with the watch? Because that is a spotlight. What is it that you want people to walk away with? And do you understand the impact of what that is? And look, this is a constant journey. I'm not perfect. It's not about being perfect, but it's about understanding the role. And so I think what gets in the way is people not really understanding what's being asked of them
Mm.
as a leader.
So I want to help. I want to understand this more. I'm going to ask you in a moment to unpack that, how we can get people to understand what leadership means. But I want to go to what you said earlier about it being a burden. You know, if I think that I'm being constantly watched, yes, I'm going to get nervous. You know, am I going to trip? Am I being lazy? Am I going to turn into a lousy person, you know, lousy leader? That is a huge burden. And my goal and my intention has always been pure. I want to do good. I want to lead people. I want to inspire them.
Yeah.
I don't want to have to worry all the time about how good I'm doing. I just want to do my job. But if
Yeah.
your job has become that of leading others, then it's become an obligation, it's become a responsibility, and somebody's holding you accountable, and it's got to start with yourself. So
Yeah.
how can we take that burden and more than less turn it into a gift?
Yeah. What a great question. I love this. So a few things come to mind. The first is realize, you talk about like, yeah, I'm under the spotlight. That can be like a burden. But wait a minute. Think about rock stars, right? Who get in front of literally 90,000 people in a coliseum, right? And they talk about that sense of like being in the spotlight and feeling like, and if you ever read autobiographies of people like Mick Jagger or Bono and stuff, they actually talk about the fact that it actually feels like it's not about them. It's this transcendent experience. They realize they are playing a role. I mean, the ones that are smart realize that. The other ones probably crash and burn because you're playing a role. Leadership is an archetype, right? So people are they're looking at you, but they're looking at you in this role. So how do you step into that and then energize people around that? And so it's important for you to intentionally step into the role. And then there are times where you go offline, where you go like, I need to step off and not do this. I mean, just as a side note, so here I work with people around communication and my wife, because it's really hard to be on 24/7, 365. And sometimes she'll say to me, Alain, I mean, you teach communication stuff. Shouldn't you be better at this by now? Because every so often I'll interrupt and I'll, all those things that I do it still. I get that way. It's hard to be able to do that. So one thing is to realize, how can you allow that and getting comfortable with being in the spotlight? Let me tell you, like, let's use Mick Jagger. When they started, they were not who he was 20 years down the road. Like, you have to get used to being in that. You have to practice at doing that. So that's one thing. The other thing I'd say is, so many leaders think, oh, I'm wearing this burden, this mantle. It's heavy. What are you doing to create a court of support around you? So who are other people that you can go to and just, hey, can I take off my leadership hat here? And may I just vent at the appropriate level? Or just go, I'm really scared about this decision we have to make, or I don't know what to do, or this, whatever it is, but have people that are in your court that can support you. Because I think so many people still have this idea that leaders need to be these superheroes, these all seeing, all knowing. And, having others who can help you and recognize what's going on is so important to be able to do that. Because the fact is, we talk about leaders being authentic. Authentic doesn't mean you show everyone who's following you everything at all times. Like, it's not about, there's a time and a place to be unfiltered, and there's a time and a place not to be. And I think part of leadership is the wisdom to know the difference.
Exactly. And when we talk about a burden, and it's hard not to see, and I'm looking at the mountain behind you, and I have a friend of mine who's a writer, and she said the mountains that we were supposed to climb, we were not supposed to carry on our backs. So I think about this burden and a mountain. Mountains were meant to scale and to have to ask you, that mountain is which one?
That
The one
mountain is
behind you.
the mountain behind me is Pomori, and that is
Amore?
not too. It's just down the road from a little mountain you might have heard called Mount Everest. It's in the
Okay.
Himalayas in the
Okay.
Everest region of Nepal. So I went trekking there. I took that picture at 5:30 in the
Amazing.
morning. Yeah.
Amazing.
So yeah.
I've got homework to do after. I digress, but it's hard not to see, it's hard not to listen and hear you and then look at the mountain behind you and to see the consistency between what you're exuding in terms of the confidence and the subject matter that you speak from your heart,
Yeah.
that and then to look at the mountain that you've scaled. And that, I believe, is how great leaders are built. Correct me if I'm wrong, would you agree that leadership is a skill, is something we can build on?
It's completely a skill. It's actually, it's not
Right.
a skill. It's a series of skills. I mean, in my writing and my thinking about this, I've kind of boiled it down to that there's sort of three meta skills that needs to happen. Is like that for you, assuming that you're working with humans, right? Leading is a human to human endeavor. And the three meta skills are connection. I think we all have to connect with other human beings. And then the second one is around communication. So how do we work together to create shared understanding? And then the third one's around collaboration. Once we have that shared understanding, what are we going to do to achieve to create something new in the world? So connection, communication, and collaboration are the
Love
meta
it.
skills. And under each of those, there are specific things. So for example, earlier we talked about building credibility. Like showing up on time is a practice of a skill that creates credibility that leads you to be able to be a better connector. So you see how we have like stacking layers of this. Oh yeah, I've thought about this quite a bit. So yeah, these are meta skills and sub skills. And the idea is just the same way that a concert pianist would go to the piano every single day and practice their scales, there are aspects and skills of leadership that need to be practiced every single day
In
consistently.
the same way that Mick Jagger would get on a stage of 90,000 people and have no issue in performing because he's built that skill. And the reason, and you and I may know these answers, but I know a lot of people that are listening to us may question, hey, leaders are born, and I have to look to a certain person who's a leader, and then not give themselves the credit that they can actually build the skills themselves. Because credibility, you show up on time and you're consistent, guess what? People will start expecting that of the and seeing it. And therefore, that's a skill you can say, hey, and my toolbox got it, right? So when we can build those skill sets, when we can get better at what we do, when we become consistent and we build credibility, when we can start scaling those mountains and not using them to weigh us down, people are going to see us as leaders and authentic leaders. And to your point, and I completely agree, there is always a time and a place. We talk about it when we talk about trust and we talk about transparency, a behavior of trust, and we think that you've got to be transparent all the time. You're not going to lie, but there's a time and a place to choose how you can be transparent.
Yeah.
And that I think comes with leadership skills and learning, because what happens is what you're doing is you're taking the burden that you carry, you're getting better at what you do, so that it becomes less of a burden and becomes more of a gift. I take that burden and I go to the people that I'm serving and I think, hey, transparency is about telling you everything that we're doing. Guess what? We're actually merging with an we're buying this company and we're going through, some discussions. You can't say everything all the time as a leader. You've
Yeah.
got to learn when you need to, when you can share and when you withhold information. Can
Yeah.
you help me a bit more? How can we learn to do this better? How can we exercise these behaviors with more grace?
Well, yeah, great idea here. So, the challenge with any of these, I mean, one of the things that as we develop our leadership is we have to get more comfortable in embracing paradox, right? That it's not all this or all that. It's, yes or no, black or white, good or bad, because anything, even a strength, pushed out and overused becomes a liability. So let's talk about honesty, right? Honesty was like, what an important, it is a primary leadership category. However, if we go down the spectrum to the point where honesty becomes brutal honesty, where I just tell you exactly what's on my mind,
Right,
we become cruel, right? And so
right,
realizing that, so part of this is where I come back to the competencies of emotional intelligence. It's that self-awareness. And then it's this relationship awareness of, am I realizing if I'm in a conversation with Muhammad right now, am I realizing the impact that, with Muhammad, I might be able to share 90% of this conversation because given this, that makes sense. But with someone else, maybe it's 65%. So it's
mm,
just how do we adjust and notice? And there are these subtle cues that we have to learn how to understand. So for me, that's the place to start, is to understand there's not a hard and fast rule. And one of the most useful places to start is asking other people for feedback on how you're showing up. I mean, this as a coach, right? So it's not about having the answers. It's about asking good questions and then listening to the
right.
response and letting those responses guide you. So for example, if I know I want to be a better leader, a really good place to start is go to the people I'm leading and saying, I'd like to get better. I'd like to get better at helping you in your role. Where do you think I should start? And then shut up and listen to what they have to say
Right.
without trying to interrupt to say, no, 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 actually, I was trying to do that. No, actually, to listen fully and then to say thank you and say, great, I'm going to take that away. And then say, I'm working on this. Can you let me know how this is going? And enroll people on your own development journey to help you.
And it's not just about listening, but it's listening and then following up with action and then coming back to that person to close the loop and say, did I listen? Did you
Yeah.
see a difference in my behavior? How do you think? Tell me about progress. And see, here's the thing. Leaders think that I'm the person up here. I can't be human. I've got to be the super person with the cape. And I can't admit that, I'm wrong. And I guess one of the things that throws me off these days is, and it's happening a lot, and you and I are on LinkedIn and other platforms, we're talking about vulnerability and courage. And it feels like there's a trend. And I want to give some people credit because I'm glad to see, especially around, in men talking more about vulnerability and, our emotional intelligence, but I don't want it to be lip service. I don't want it to be the soup du jour. We're all going to talk about it because, a few of the authors have started talking about it and it's become common. Let's all talk about vulnerability. Let's all talk about courage. Where I'm going with this, Alain, is when you talk about being in a court and having people around you and you see your team and you trust them, you can put your guard down and you can be vulnerable and you can say, hey, you know what? I really don't know. I don't have a crystal ball. I don't have all the answers, but I trust you guys. And because I do, I'm looking for input. I think most leaders don't know how to exercise that vulnerability and use it as a strength. They see it as a burden.
Yeah.
But if they work with their teams to show them that it's actually a gift, to use your language, now they're saying, hey, if you trust me, I'm opening up to you and I'm listening. How can we do things better? How do leaders, my question to you, how do leaders start feeling more comfortable and being able to come off their pedestals and to stand and extend their arms and hands and clasped and say, let's work this out together? Yes, yeah, I'm maybe the CEO or the whatever, I'm the person here making a lot of decisions at the helm, but let's do this together. How do we do that? How do we play ball together in the same court?
Yeah. So I think so many leaders struggle with this particular thing because, again, maybe they don't have any training or background in the ideas of emotional intelligence or a little bit. They've read a little bit, they know a little bit, but not too much. And what they do know is, I know how to run a business. I know how to get results in this way. And I think the fear is that if they, we'll call it devolve, right, into this talk, it's going to this is group therapy. What are we doing? This is weird. I'm out of my comfort zone. And here's the part that people forget when we're talking about to the team, and to use your example, is like, hey team, I'm not sure. I'd like your input. That's just half of the story. Because the part that we tend to forget in these conversations, because humans can only focus on one conscious thing at a time. So we're talking about vulnerability and we're not wanting people's input and getting trust, is there's a bigger reason. And the reason I want your input is because we have a job to do and we have results to deliver. So the vulnerability and the trust and the authenticity and the openness and the emotional intelligence is actually a means to a business outcome. All right. So because some people, and I say, look, I grew up in New York City, so I'm the dyed-in-the-wool cynic because, I'm like, and I better do this because I've been talking about this stuff for 20 years. And I'll tell you, 20 years ago, there was a lot more skepticism in the business world around these concepts. But I would name it. Like, you're sitting here listening to me going, emotions at work. I mean, I would name it, and I'd call it, and I'd play out the cynic because I get it. The point of all these things is to help us be better. And part of being better in an organization is delivering on our promises, which is to show up and deliver whatever that is: profit, revenue, customer satisfaction, reduce cycle time, you name it. We all have to do that. These are all means to an end. And I've done the research. I mean, I wrote about this in my book, and you may know some of this stuff. It's like the fact that we talked about trust. For example, there's a wonderful case study that they found that they measured high trust cultures versus low trust cultures. And they found that high trust cultures outperform, from a profit margin point of view, 286%
Amazing.
over low trust, right? So
speed.
The fact is, yeah, it's the speed of trust, right? It's all the work that was done by Stephen M.R. Covey. He cites all this in his book, The Speed of Trust. And the idea is, yeah, when you have high trust, you have speed. When you have low trust, things slow down. So it's helping. So for me, a lot of my work is educating people, partially educating them to understand there's the business case as to why. So if you don't believe me, I'm going to cite a bunch of numbers because that obviously is speaking in your love language, right? You're a numbers person. I'm going to talk to you in your love language. And now that you believe me, let's get into the work of actually learning how to do it. Because now that we understand, yeah, there's a need to, let's go ahead and do it.
I think about the survival story that you shared with your daughter. Leaders have to be like that teacher. You're going to go play survival game every single day, and you're going to see how you can actually solve the problems. I mean, that's all we're doing, whether it's a service or a product that you're putting together, you're solving problems for your clients, right?
Yeah.
That isn't that essentially what we do? So it's a survival game every single day, and we are building the trust. And the way that we're doing that is by bringing people on board. It's by letting down our guard and saying, together, we can do it. Now, I think 20 years ago, that language may, to your point, it may still have been seen as it's a little archaic or it's a little too fuzzy, or, they call them soft skills. I
Yeah.
think we need to move forward and say, are these not essential skills? Are they not the skills that absolutely we cannot do business without? To your point, 200+%, more efficiency, more productivity, and using trust and talking about our emotions. But that's not the end. It's the way that we're going to get there. The end is still solving the problem for our client.
Mm-hmm.
But rather than me as the leader telling you, do it this way because I said so, we're actually doing it together and listening and thinking, what's the best way to do it? Where have you seen this really fail?
Where have I seen it fail? Oh,
Yeah.
it fail. Oh, I see it fail all the time. I mean, because there's a lot of leaders who still subscribe to the old school power play. They can't let go of the need to feel like I've got to hold on to this all. I mean, so I'll give you an example. I was working with a company. This is a global energy company, Fortune 100 global energy company, and they're having an annual conference, and they have hundreds of thousands of employees all around the world, and they invite 2,000 people to this conference, and from all over. It's kind of handpicked 2,000 people, some of their high performers, and it's a typical State of the Union for thing. And they start the conference with the CEO comes out. And if you've been to a large annual conference, it's pretty much the same general format. The CEO comes out, they're going to welcome
Rah,
everybody.
rah,
They're
rah.
a little rah, rah, rah. They're going to do a little flashback about the year in the past. They're going to talk about their vision for the year ahead. They're going to talk about what's going to go on at the conference and get everyone excited. And then they're going to pass it off to somebody else to kind of get into the details. That's generally how these things work. Right, the CEO. So they do the whole thing, get a marching band, and they had, all sorts of stuff to kind of pump up the crowd. So everyone's like, woo, 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 like really excited. CEO comes out, doesn't say good morning, doesn't say welcome to Atlanta, doesn't say anything like thank you for traveling around the world, just goes, okay, I'm going to talk to you about last year's results. And he puts up a slide and he starts, and it's basically your general overview earnings slide, 8-point font, too small, people can't read it. And he's like, all right, so here we go. And here you can see this, and in the last column here, this is EBITDA. That's earnings. Wait. If you don't know EBITDA, you shouldn't be in this room. What am I saying? Like literally, and you can see people crossing their arms in front of their chest and they're sagging and like thinking like, who let this guy on? And this is the CEO of a public held company. Who let this guy on stage? Like, did they realize the impact? And so unfortunately, too many people, here's the thing, too many people have been so wired, and I say wired is just through habit, right? They don't have a lot of role models of people doing this well. And so when they get into these roles, they do as they have seen, which is command and control, even though they'll say, oh, that's not my style. But if you watch when push comes to shove, they're like, we're going this way. And they don't take the time to gather other people's input or listen or care about stuff. And so it's really tough if you've never seen this role modeled well to do it well. And frankly, I think the business world would still be doing it in the old model if it wasn't for the fact that millennials, Gen Y and Gen Z came into the workforce and said, screw you, I'm not going to put up with this crap. And they didn't. And that's what started the shift. I mean, if you look at a lot of industries, and now, Gen X and Gen Y make up the majority, Gen Y and Gen Z make up the majority of the workforce, obviously with Gen X as well. But they're the ones because the demographics. I'll give you an example on that one. So in the consulting industry, it was very common. I mean, this is a common model. They hire a bunch of young, smart people out of college, and the expectation is they're going to work them for 2 years, and they call it churn and burn. They burn and churn, right? They like work them hard, and that a lot of people are going to leave, and they know that some people are going to rise. Well, when they got to the time when millennials started to be the age of their new hires, the millennials said, I'm not going to come and play your game. I have no desire to work my butt off for 30 years to make partner, to be you. I have no desire to sit in this office and be you old, tired, cranky old person. And so those consulting firms, the big ones, started to shift how they recruit. And that has spread its, I give that as an example. But if you look overall in the workforce, I mean, we're having these conversations now about well-being and how important
Right.
it is, and mental health in the workplace, right? Like, look, were there needs for well-being and mental health 20 years ago? Of course. But the demand, like if you think the customer is always right, now our customers, which are our larger generation employee workforce, are saying, you need to do something about this. Because the
Right.
other thing that we have now with technology, like 25 years ago, if you weren't happy, you were stuck, or maybe some friend of yours knew if there was another opportunity. Today, between Glassdoor and LinkedIn, you know where the grass is greener. So like the median job tenure today for workers age 25 to 34 is only 2.8 years. So job hopping is the new normal, if you think about it. And people are not going to put up with that lousy command and control leadership. In fact, a lot of these folks say, you know what? I'll quit my job. I'll move back home with my parents before because I like my parents. So the world has changed, and technology has been a huge game changer in this. So leaders need to either catch up and change, or they're going to be left behind.
And actually, I think they are already left behind. And the good companies are getting the good recruits. They're getting the people who aren't putting up with this crap. But let me
Yeah.
play devil's advocate, because I completely agree with you. When I look at, the landscape and how it has shifted, I'm thinking of the words that you just used, when push comes to shove. And man, have we been pushed and shoved. I've got bruises from my butt to my head with 2020 just
Yeah.
going awry for everybody. And here I'm
Yeah.
not making light of the people that have lost family members and friends and their vocations and their jobs. But I'm talking to people like you and I that have been able to, and I don't want to use the word shift and pivot, but for lack of better words, we've
Yeah.
shifted, we've pivoted, we've been able to make
Yeah.
ends meet, right? But you know what I'm still seeing, Alan? Even though we are talking about well-being in the workplace, and we were talking about amplifying voices that have been silenced, and I love it, but I'm seeing we haven't done enough. And I'm seeing that we're going back to where we were 20 years ago. So while we're not going back to the brokenness that we had, where the racism or sexism was blatantly obvious in a workplace, where, hey, Miss So-and-so, get me the coffee. What we're seeing now with COVID and the pandemic, women, for example, and let's just use one example, women have had to be forced to, I just got off the phone today with a client who said to me, I'm home. My kids are home. They're being, they're on their Zoom calls at school. Don't they know I've got a job? Right? So all of a sudden, women who are trying to be emancipated, allow me to use that expression, because now we've opened up the workplaces and say, hey, equity and equality, right? But guess what? When push comes to shove, we put the people who've been at the lower, on the lower rungs, we've put them back and said, you know what? This is your comfort area. So you have to go back here. So I don't know. I'm hopeful that we've moved forward and we've created some sort of a better metrics. But I feel that with the crisis, we've kind of fallen back quite a bit. Help me out.
Yeah. I think the answer is yes and yes. It's a both and, right? So, from my perspective, as we look at the crisis of this last year and the impact is, we can talk about all these general. Obviously, we're speaking in broad strokes here about what's
Agreed.
happening, the state and overall. And within that, you have to look at any individual, not just company, but team within a company is its own culture. And what is that leader of that team or culture doing to create that culture? And so I think that given right now with the economy, given how much unemployment there is, there's a little bit of a, okay, people are desperate maybe to hold on to their job, and they're just, they'll put up with lousy leadership because they're just grateful to have a job. And that will be a season, and then hopefully we'll come out of that season. But again, if we come back to these principles, which I always end up coming back to, because the ebbs and flows of 2019 to 2020 to 21 will change, but the principles of caring, about connection, about communication, about collaboration, those don't change. And so ultimately what will happen is the people who embrace and harness these skills are the ones who will be able to attract, engage, and retain higher levels of talent. And totally agree with you about the sense of women in the workforce. I mean, we haven't even gotten into the larger cultural and political and systemic issues. I mean, one of my favorite quotes comes from Peter Drucker, who said, you put a good person in a lousy system and the lousy system wins every time. I mean, look, I'm in the US. Look at what the US, I was just talking to someone who's doing her master's thesis on this. Look at how in the US, how do we support working mothers and working families? I mean, I have a cousin and he's in Berlin. His wife is giving birth for their first child in March. And between the two of them, the government is going to pay them just about full salary. Between the two of them, they can take 2 years off, right? And of course, that's totally normal. Here, nothing. Like, maybe you can get 3 months unpaid leave and not get fired.
We penalize them.
Yeah. So think about this. So think about just the struggles. And yeah, so now we have the second shift, we have the third shift, right? We have, like you said, it's the mom who's home, who's trying to do a job and make sure her kids are being able to be going to remote school online. I mean, these are the cultural elements that go on. And until we make some larger political, because what is politics, but making policy changes that actually, we, again, do what you say you're going to do. We talked about that earlier, right? So we say, oh, we care about families. Like, really? Like, because if you look at the actions in the US, we don't care about families. It's like, you're on your own. Good luck. And the myth that we say is, this is America. Anyone can rise up if you work hard enough. Well, and of course, people take a sample size of one and they point out to certain, well, look what this person did. They did it. You can do it. They did it. You can do it. Well, if you look at the law of large numbers, the politics aren't supporting people's ability to do that.
And you shouldn't have to bust your ass so hard to make ends meet.
Yeah.
There's just some things that you shouldn't have to choose.
Yeah.
Right. And telling somebody that you've got to pick between having a family, starting a family, or keeping a job should not be an option. Meaning not that we shouldn't give people the flexibility to choose, but it shouldn't have to be a choice they need to make. And, I think whether we're talking politics, whether we're talking the politicking within an organization, it's still the same broken system. And we see the role modeling from whether it's our governments down into our workplaces. So here's where I shift into the question that I ask all my guests, which is, what awesome learning, and I've learned and grown so much by what you've shared today, and so inspired by how well you articulated everything we've discussed. So thank you, first of all. But from your experience and the people that you've worked with and the organizations that you've helped to shift how they do things into, just better, what can you share with my listeners about how they can do things better? What one leadership takeaway can you tell people how they can become more authentic, how to really enjoy the gift and not to keep turning that gift into a burden?
Yeah. So on this, we talked about feedback earlier. So I oftentimes talk about that as something to take away, but we've talked about that already. Now, what I would say is to turn this gift into joy. So I'm going to plug a book, and I love this book, and it's by a guy named BJ Fogg, Tiny Habits, right? So, because ultimately all of behavior boils down to habits, right? 95% of our behavior is unconscious. And BJ Fogg is a professor at the Stanford Design School, and he's basically figured this out. And one of the key things, and I do this in my work too, is what we need to be able to do is the key to inspiration and motivation is we have to feel like we're making progress towards a meaningful goal. And so what I would suggest is look at, we all get so much done in the course of a day. And if you're like me, which is like me most of the time, is like, okay, it's 10 o'clock at night. I've done 80 things, but I look at my list and I'm like, there's 90 more things to do. And I feel more like crap than I feel good about everything I got done because there's more to do. And so what the work of Tiny Habits is about is learning how to look at things and celebrate, like viscerally, like whatever you need to do, whether it's a fist bump, a high five, a woohoo, is you've got to feel the excitement, the celebration of success, because that's what starts to rewire the brain, because that's how we learn how to do things new and differently. So what I would say is, as you're on this leadership journey, build in little milestones of I'm going to do this. That's a stretch outside of your comfort zone. And when you get there, find a way to celebrate it. If you can celebrate it publicly, even better, like obviously in your own way. So this to me is key, because otherwise life can feel like a treadmill. In this information age, it is so easy to feel like you are drowning in, there's so much else out there. And if you play the comparison game, whether it's social media or anywhere else, you're going to lose, right? Because there's always somebody else who's either richer, thinner, happier,
doing it better, doing it better, bigger. Yep.
and realize that you are not seeing the 360-degree three-dimensional version of them. You're seeing like we said before, you're seeing the filtered version. You're seeing the photoshopped version, the Instagrammed version. So pick your own goals, go for them, make some milestones along the way, and celebrate the journey, because frankly, it's all we really have is the journey. I mean, and if you do that and fall in love with the process, the results, I think, end up taking care of themselves.
And so Alain, I'm going to have one takeaway that you just gave me from that. And, where we think it's Christmas soon or it's somebody's birthday and we wait for these special events to celebrate the milestones, celebrate getting up every day and knowing that you have one more day to make a difference, to give your gift to the world. And that sense of gratitude, that sense of celebration, that sense of accomplishment, those little tiny habits that you can do every day will help you inch towards some of the bigger goals, some of the bigger milestones. And so, it'd be boring if I thought, oh, I'm waiting for the goal that I'm going to accomplish in 5 years. Gee, I'm not going to celebrate anything for 5 years. Or if you tell a client, well, you're going to do well in 5 years, or an employee, and you'll get your 3-year badge. But
Yeah.
celebrate every single day. If not just because every single day is a gift,
Yeah.
turn it into one. So I want to thank you. You've given me a lot of nuggets of wisdom. You've taught me, and I get, I'm inspired with each conversation that I have, and you've inspired me so much today. Thank you for being my unfiltered guest, and thank you for sharing part of who you are and what you do and how you give a gift back to the world. Thank you very much, Alain.
Mohammed, you're most welcome. It's been my pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to Unfiltered, the show about authentic leadership and personal growth. Like what you heard? Click subscribe, share it, and tell a friend about it. And don't forget to leave a rating.